Well, hello there, and welcome to another interview with me, Jack Lucas Caffrey. Now, today, my guest is an author of books that your mom wouldn't want you to read, but they're pretty good anyway. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meredith Wild. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Jack.
You're welcome. So, I thought the first thing I'd get into is how did you actually get into writing novels? Because, yeah, how did you get into it?
Well, I actually got my bachelor's in English. So I had always been interested in writing. I did a lot of writing when I was young, had aspirations of writing through college. But once it came time to actually get a job, I ended up starting my own web design company, which turned into a software development company. And that kind of took over the first 10 years of my professional life. And but at some point along the road there, I started to have this draw to writing again. I had started reading a lot more, just leisure reading, just as a kind of way to de-stress from work because the business was really stressful for me toward the end. And then I was reading a romance novel, and I paused and I thought to myself, I think I could write something like this. I've been writing. I have a degree in English, so that should give me the confidence boost that I need to actually write a novel. But I didn't really know anything about the craft of fiction writing, so I hired a editor to help me with like the first few chapters of an idea that I had, and I just started just chipping away at it on the weekends or whenever I had spare time. My three kids were very little at the time, so as soon as they went to bed, I went to my little cubby office and tried to get a few chapters out, and a novel was born. And then I just realized that I was a lot more passionate about that than I was the business at the time. So I did what I could to transition over to writing full time.
And that first book that you wrote was the Hardwired book that was in the Hacker series. And so, what was it like writing the Hacker series and all that? I believe some of that was based off of your sort of tech life originally.
Right. So, I mean, the old adage, they say, write what you know. So that is essentially what I did. I had, in my business at the time, I was trying to get angel funding for a kind of a side project that I was working on. And I had a conversation with the CEO of another company, just kind of like a mentor type conversation, asking for his advice. And it was such a good conversation. He was so approachable and he's very, very successful. I very shortly after that conversation got the spark of an idea for Hardwired and what it would be like if my heroine was had a burgeoning business and was approaching a VC firm, and there was a love interest there, and kind of the power play that would come between a heroine who was, coming into her own and, had things going for her professionally. That was a lot more interesting of a story to me than a lot of the stories that I had been reading, where, the female characters sometimes don't have a lot going for them or they're not really established in the professional world. So that kind of character was a lot more relatable for me. So I decided to use a lot of my tech experience and experiences and pulled them into the story.
And it seemed to have grabbed the audience anyway, because you ended up becoming a New York Times bestseller with this series. So, what was it like actually becoming a New York Times bestseller? And just talk to me through that experience.
Well, I made the decision at the beginning of my writing career to self-publish. I did this mostly because I had entrepreneurial experience already, so I wasn't too daunted by the prospect of just figuring it all out by myself. I had marketing experience, so I just decided I would put the books out into the world on my own. I wasn't going to bother trying to get a traditional publisher. Um, and so I published the first four books of my career on my own, and the fourth book hit the New York Times bestseller list at number one. So obviously I did very well selling the
Yeah.
books on my own. And that was a really amazing moment, especially knowing that I had earned it on my own. And it's a rare thing for an indie author. That's what we call ourselves, indie authors, to hit those kinds of milestones. So it was a really special moment. And what it did was it got the attention of traditional publishers. So I did end up selling the 5 books in the Hacker series to a New York publisher after that, because they were so impressed with how well the series was doing. So I guess now I'm a hybrid. I self-published, but I also have traditional publishers.
And you also have your own sort of publishing company called Waterhouse, and I believe other writers are there as well. So what's it like at Waterhouse? How did that sort of come about?
So after I took the deal with the New York publisher, I, no longer was the marketing solely in my control. A lot of the, behind the scenes work of publishing was no longer my responsibility. However, I had built this infrastructure really for just my own books, to bring them out into the world and, market them and brand them and all that. And so I thought, well, I've done all this, I might as well figure out if I can try to do it for somebody else. So I actually started to publish the books written by my editor at the time, Helen Hart. And then we also picked up another author, Audrey Carlin. And within a very short period of time, we launched both of them to the #1 on the New York Times list. So that's kind of where Waterhouse was born, just trying to take the resources and everything that we had learned, getting me started, and devoting that to other people's careers. So, yeah.
And you also do some mentoring as well for like other people's careers and everything. So how is the mentoring? How does that go?
Um, it's just something I kind of dabble in. A lot of people come to me for advice, because I certainly don't know everything about the industry, but I have forged a pretty unique path. And I've worked with traditional, I've worked self-pub, just very simple indie operation on my own, and up to, a kind of a very complex publishing operation with international distribution and being stocked in all the bookstores and foreign rights and all that. So I have a pretty broad range of information to share. And yeah, so it's just a way for me to connect with other authors and try to pass along any advice that would be helpful to them on their journey.
As well as that, you also do some books where you collab with other people. So how many sort of writers have you collaborated with, and what's it like when you go collaborate with a different book author?
Right. So let's see, I think I've co-written with 5 different people at this point.
Gee!
Yeah, it's a lot. It's hard. It's bad when you have to think about it. But yeah, so I kind of started with this Misadventures series that I had the idea for. They're actually in the background here. They're all the rainbow color books, but they're kind of short form novels. They're really spicy. They're really fun. And the inspiration behind it was just to really have fun with writing and not take it too seriously. And so I teamed up with a few friends in the industry, and I was like, let's just write some crazy, sexy books. And that's what we did. And we had a blast with it. And the readers really enjoy them because they're, it's not like a long series that you have to follow. You could just pick it up and read it in an evening. And yeah. And yeah, it's different with every person. There's really no rules except for the ones you agree on with the person that you're co-writing with. But most of the time I end up just switching off chapters. So a lot of times I'll do dual point of view. So the heroine, the hero, and we pick one so that the voice kind of stays consistent with that point of view. And other times somebody will do a first draft, and then I'll go in and kind of heavily edit and polish. Yeah, so there's all kinds of different ways you can do it, but it is pretty fun, and it's always cool to be able to bring a story into the world with somebody else, because writing is a very solitary occupation, so it does make it a lot more fun.
And which one sort of book do you prefer to like write? Do you prefer like the shorter books, like the Misadventure series, or some of the more longer ones, like the Hacker series?
Well, I don't think there's one answer to that because like the misadventures, they're probably the least stressful books I've written. Just not a care in the world. However, there's other series that I've like, near death, like trying to get it over the finish line. It's been a really agonizing process, but at the same time, sometimes the books that are the hardest to write are also the most satisfying to finish. And it's the work I'm most proud of. So, they each have their place. But I wouldn't say there's really a favorite either way.
Yeah. And you also have a latest book series called Blood of Zeus. So, how's it been like writing that? I believe there's also a new book in that as well called Bridge of Souls. So, yeah, talk to me all about that.
Right. So, Blood of Zeus it's like a paranormal romance. It's kind of magical realism. It takes place in LA. And I've co-written this series with Angel Payne. And we actually just finished Bridge of Souls last week.
Hey!
Yeah, that's always the best feeling, sending it to the editor. And so we've just set a release date yesterday. We set it for December 13th of this year. So we're very excited.
That sounds pretty cool. And is there any sort of little plot teaser that you can give, or is it too secret?
No, oh, for that book, well, you'd have to read the first three to understand. I'd spoil something if I got too much into the last book because it builds. There's a lot of plot twists and there might be a cliffhanger.
And as well, you've actually wrote 21 books, I believe. Like, how have you written 21 in the span of like only a little over 10 years?
Not even actually. I think it's only about 8 or 9 years. I lose track, but yeah. I write a lot more slowly than I used to. When I first started writing, I could write 3 or 4 books a year. So now I'm more like 1 or 2 a year. But yeah, I don't know. It's momentum is really important. I think a lot of times people take a very long time to write a book, maybe if it's a very complicated story, for sure. But also sometimes when you don't agonize over every word and every sentence and you just kind of get into that creative flow, it is ultimately better for the story. So I try to get in that space as often as I can with everything else going on.
In most of your books, they're usually very spicy romance novels, and they can have some very, very, very spicy scenes. I've read them, and as much as I would love to read them out to the viewers, I don't think it's suitable for radio. So, what I'd like to ask you on that is, how are you able to write some of that spicy romance? Where does that come from? Like, my granddad was wondering, is it like just from your head or personal experience? What is it?
I don't know. There is more to the books than the spice, but the readers do enjoy that. So, there's always a romance plot. There's usually some kind of suspense plot that's going on. And sometimes there's a sexual plot too. So yeah, I don't know. It comes from, I don't know, fantasy, idea, experience. It's a fabrication in my brain. It's not like an autobiography or anything, but yeah. And I think over time you learn to just have fun with it. I remember writing my first like sexy scene, and I remember just being like just so flushed and red in the face, like I couldn't believe what I was putting down on paper, and it was very challenging for me to write those scenes. But then, after I had a few novels under my belt, it was like they were some of the most fun scenes to write just because you can be kind of uninhibited and it's I don't know, it's fun. I kind of liken it to writing like an action scene in suspense because I wrote a romantic suspense series. It was heavily suspense. And the pacing was so different. It was not about feelings, it's like go, go, go. And that was a really challenging pace for me to write at. But there were parts that were like the action scenes, and I'm like, these are so hard to write. And I'm like, this is kind of how it was when I first started writing sexy scenes. It's like, these are so hard to write. But I think once you get the rhythm of it, and you figure out the writing tools at your disposal and little tricks, it becomes easier.
That's very interesting. And I'm surprised that you can actually compare the spicy sort of stuff to the sort of action scenes as well. That actually is very interesting.
Yeah, it was just kind of an observation that I made. I mean, I know they're very different experiences, but it was kind of a similar, hurdle for me, I guess.
And since you've done a load of books as well, will there ever be like a movie of any of your novels? A lot of books tend to become movies, so is there any plans for any of the books to turn into a movie?
Yeah, periodically at different points through the years, I've had conversations with people, producers and production companies and all that. And there is usually at least one book of interest. So I have the Red Ledger with somebody right now who's trying to make something happen. But it's it's a complicated animal, and it's a lot different than sitting at the desk and writing a book start to finish. You have to get a lot of people on board and a lot of people excited and available. So hopefully one day something happens. We're working on it.
And since you mentioned like the Red Ledger and that being most possible of becoming a movie, who do you imagine being the cast of that movie?
Oh, geez.
Who's the dream cast for that?
Well, I don't know that it would really translate into reality that way, but it is helpful sometimes when you're writing to dream cast your characters, just so that you have, a more specific visual in your mind as you're writing. So this might seem funny, but Tristan, the character in that series, I always imagined as Zac Efron. And Isabel was Alicia Vikander. So who knows?
Well, look, Meredith, it was great speaking to you. Is there any sort of last things you'd like to say? Any sort of, maybe plug the book again? And yeah.
Yeah, well, Bridge of Souls is actually my 21st novel. So, but I've written many series. Obviously, the Hacker series is a fan favorite. The Bridge series, the Misadventure stories are fun. And I've, just recently finished up this latest installment of the Blood of Zeus series. So there's a wide variety of work to explore, and you can always find out more information on my website at meredithwild.com. They're all up there.
And you can find me simply by searching up my YouTube channel, Jack Lucas Caffrey. You might already be on it if you're watching it on YouTube. But Meredith, thank you very much for coming on, and yes, speak to you soon.